Welcome to Galactic and Spiritual Wisdom for the New Earth. I am your host, Cassandra Clegg, and in this episode, I will be talking about the dark night of the soul, as well as how holding compassion and empathy in your interactions with others can help shift that energy as well. So thank you for being here. So I'm just going to dive right into this dark night of the soul piece. This is something that I have been asked by clients previously. So what is dark night of the soul? What does it represent? What's actually happening with you when you're going through this process? As well as, can this happen more than once to you? What's happening to your vibration? And these are all very, very valid questions. And of course, like I'll point out for my whole podcast, is that this is coming through my perceptions and my experiences, and doesn't mean I'm 100% right. This is just how I've seen it and how I have viewed it. So interestingly enough though, dark night of the soul is when we become fully conscious and aware of the experiences that we have had in our life. And once we become aware of those things, we usually start to see that it's been an illusion in some way. Like, this is not who I actually am. This is not who I want to be. Or thinking that certain people in your life were supportive and amazing to you, and realizing that maybe they actually weren't. Maybe they didn't have your best interest at heart. There's so many ways of which we can even take traumatic experiences as well that we've stepped down that might come to the surface during this too. So anytime this happens, it helps to shatter an illusion in our life. Something that we've held on to be true that is actually not true for us. Often we notice patterns here as well. Sometimes it's self-sabotage and judgments, limiting behaviors and beliefs, and so on. And when this happens, it's like we start to remove that mask. We start to remove that perception of our life and ourselves. And we finally start to see things through a more neutral perspective when you start working through the dark night of the soul. Okay, this is more of like a mid to later transgression. You finally get to a neutral place and you start to understand what feels right and what doesn't. So in the beginning, you may not feel that neutral because obviously it's a triggering process. It's showing you areas in your life where you really need to work. And I mean, self-growth and development, it never ends in this lifetime because we're human. All we ever know is constant evolution, change, and growth. And I don't mean that in a way where you should never do it, because I think that self-awareness, it helps you keep on your spiritual path. It helps keep you on your physical journey. It just helps you start to really understand like what it is you want to do in your life. And we're so dynamic. So something that we really love for say 5 or 6 years, we might realize, hey, I need to shift this and focus more on a different direction. And that's totally fine. We are creators. We are allowed to do these things in our life. And how I like to view our vibration is that it's not low. Our vibration inherently isn't low. These experiences that we have might lower that frequency, you know what I mean? So it's not necessarily that we have a low vibration. We have things attached to our vibration that might be downstepping that. And the reason why I say this as well, because I have noticed many people make it an identity. Oh, I'm feeling this way, so I'm so low vibe right now. And to me, that's not necessarily true. It's the, experience or the emotional charge that might be considered low vibe in some ways. And I mean, I'll do another episode on emotions because to me they're not bad when dealt with in a healthy way, but I digress. But I try to not make these things as good or bad or evil or, I try not to have those judgments, but again, we're human and we might have these judgments. So everything in our life that comes through, and it's something that was really hard for me to hear in the beginning. It was very triggering to hear that any experience that we've had with these emotional charges attached, when we finally work through the emotional charges, we're able to gain more wisdom from that said experience. Now, as someone who's dealt with a lot of trauma, hearing that, I'm like, Why do I have to have these very traumatic experiences in order to gain this sort of wisdom? Why can't I have learned it in an easier way? And I was mad. Anytime people said that, it made me feel like I was being, attacked for, you know, for lack of better terms here. I felt like I called it in. I felt like it was my fault that it happened. And it came to a place to understand that our experiences, for the most part, are typically, not something we've necessarily created, so to speak. Like we didn't, as like a 5-year-old, create this negative vortex that drew in this experience. But as an adult, we are 100% fully responsible for healing that. And as adults, we get to actually choose our perspectives and our thoughts and our thinking patterns, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. But as an adult, we are more in charge, so we can be more in charge, like, of our experiences. But that being said, I am not going into victim shaming because that's not what I mean by this. But for example, like I've had plenty in my young adulthood of traumatic experiences where, I was actually mad with myself. How could I put myself in this position? I trusted this person, but this happened to me. Like, why did I do this? Why did I attract this? And it made me so angry for so long to the point where I couldn't move past the actual situation. And what I had to come to realize was, okay, so even if for whatever reason it's not personal, I can make that choice later on if it was something that I brought into my field based on my viewpoints and my thinking patterns at that time, but only I can make that choice for myself. But then I started to realize all of these quote unquote negative experiences, because I was saying they were so, so negative, I wasn't able to see some of the wisdom and beauty within it. So with this experience that I had with a friend, even though it's something I would never want to go through again, and definitely not something I'd ever recreate in my life, it was actually very eye-opening for me, knowing that my guides were there, that I was very much protected. It was a situation where things could have gone south really quickly. I could have ended up in numerous situations where I probably wouldn't have gone home at this point. It was dangerous for me to be there. And what happened was my guides essentially came in because I felt like something was off and something was weird. And I could feel my face going funny. Almost felt like my face was going numb. And I was having a bit of a hard time swallowing. And I just thought, oh my God, what's happening? And I remember I heard my guides clear as day, and they said, hey, just so you know, you've been drugged. But don't freak out. We're going to tell you everything that you need to say and do so that you can go home safe. And of course, at this point, I'm like, what the heck? I have never heard my guides before. I've never heard them like that. And it was in a bit of a different voice, and they were just like, hey, we'll take care of you, so listen to us and we'll get you home, type thing. So I thought it was bizarre. So I'm like, okay. So then I just sat and I just waited. And they said, just make sure you try to breathe and stay calm. Make sure he doesn't know anything has changed for you. And at this point, I was only drinking like a bit of warm water with lemon. And the interesting thing was that he kept asking me, are you feeling okay? Are you feeling okay? And I just looked at him and I said, yeah, why wouldn't I? I'm just drinking water. I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling fine. I'm just a little tired because I have to work early tomorrow and I just worked late tonight. So, and then I heard my guide say, tell him that you just need to go home and get some sleep because you have a long day tomorrow. So that's what I did. And then he said, okay, I'll walk you to your car. And immediately my gut dropped. And my guides were like, no, 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 calm down. It's fine. It's okay. So like, okay. So I got my purse, got my keys, put them in my pocket so they were easy to reach. And at this point, I could really feel like my whole body going jello-y. And I just thought, how am I going to walk? But somehow I managed to put one foot in front of the other and act relatively normal. And again, kept being asked, are you sure you're feeling okay? And again, I said, well, why wouldn't I be? I just had some water and I'm just tired from work. So I got my shoes on. And then as soon as he opened the door, I almost felt like a little sense of relief. But at the same time, like I'm still on the third floor. I still have to go through an elevator. I still have to get to my car. So I just kept with my guides and like, just make small talk, just make some small conversation. So I was doing that. And, he walked me all the way to my physical car, which was parked across the street, downtown Calgary. And I just remember thinking it was so hard to see at this point, and I had no idea what was happening, So I immediately got to my car. I took my keys and I'm like, okay, see you later, bye. And as soon as I unlocked the car, I like threw myself in there and I locked it immediately. And then my guys were like, okay, now you need to call your best friend. So they're like, take out your phone, and it was just so interesting because at that point, I didn't have a lock screen on my phone. I had taken it off earlier that day. So I don't know why I did that, but I'm so thankful I did because there's no way. And I was able to, speed dial one of my friends. And it was just a really crazy experience. So when I think of these quote unquote negative experiences, it also allowed me to trust my intuition, allowed me to trust my guides, which I know might sound weird to some people, but at this point, I've never fully heard them. And, many might say, oh, that wasn't actually them, that was just you. And really, at the end of the day, it's how I felt about the situation where I thought, okay, pretty cool. But for the longest time, I was angry about that situation. Why did this person do this to me? Like, I've been friends with this person for so long. Why did this happen? And it was interesting because I had a blood test done and all of that. And then it was funny because shortly after that, he actually left the city and I haven't heard from him since. So just a really interesting thing. And once I worked through like my anger and my emotions around that situation, I was able to see, okay, I do hold power. I am able to get out of situations no matter how scary they may seem. And I was able to learn from that, which is such a hard place to be in. But back to the dark night of the soul. So you get to a place where you can fully start to see things through a neutral perspective and really start to understand what feels right and what doesn't for you. And in my experience, this dark night of the soul, even though it may be really hard, and I know when I first had my dark night of the soul, I was really depressed. I almost felt like there was no purpose for me. There was nothing in my life that I could do. I just felt like my life had ended. And in some ways it did. Everything that I knew, like I was a manager at a couple different restaurants. I was working a lot. Sure, I owned a house and I owned a lot of nice, pretty material things, but I remember writing down, and I still have that note where I'm like, I'm successful, I'm making lots of money, but I don't have that connection. I don't have people close to me that I can just call upon. I feel lonely and lost. And that's kind of what ignited that. And I was going through a lot of really bad physical pain at the time as well. So it was the pain that got me into a session. But what I come to realize once I jumped into actually learning this modality was I was actually going through a dark night of the soul. Every single session I received, I was crying my eyes out for days afterwards. As soon as the session was done, I would hop off the table and I would just like literally go outside. I would go for a run, or I would go to the bathroom and lock myself in there for 5 or 10 minutes and just bawl my eyes out. I was literally removing all these masks, and I realized at this point in time that this person I thought I was this happy-go-lucky, funny person. Like, I really thought I was a good person back then. But looking back, and even at this time, when the masks came off, I realized I was really cynical. I honestly didn't really care too much about how other people felt. I cared only about what I felt. So regardless of what that looked like, right? And I did a lot of things out of integrity. And I wasn't happy. I was depressed all the time. I wasn't emotionally connected back then. And I remember that I was dating someone at the time and I was going through a lot of really bad health issues. But I remember like he was a pretty emotionally connected person. And although it wasn't the healthiest of relationships, but I remember saying like, You are too emotional for me. And I came to realize it was because I couldn't connect with mine. So for me, with this dark night of the soul, realizing I wasn't this happy, good person that I thought I was. And I mean, back then, a lot of people thought I was nice. A lot of people thought I was a good person. But for me, I knew different. I knew that I was a cynical, judgmental, stressed out ball of a person. And I knew this wasn't who I was, but I had to grieve all of these parts of myself. I had to really feel just how this was all an illusion, something I put up to avoid my pain. I put up this illusion of who I was, who I thought I was, because I didn't want to go through the healing process of all the traumas that I experienced when I was growing up. I just didn't want to see it. I just wanted to pretend it didn't exist. I just wanted to go on with my life. But unfortunately, I came to realize for myself that that wasn't a part of my path. And with all of this I needed to heal, it's what actually propelled me into my spiritual awakening and into this dark night of the soul. So again, I don't feel like the dark night of the soul lowers our vibration at all. It makes us aware to what might be downstepping our naturally high vibration, so our experiences and our emotions. And so when you begin doing the work, you start working through the emotional charges and life experiences. And often there's karmic attachments here as well. And you may go up and down as you do this process. You'll have days and moments in time where you feel so good, where you feel like the burden is lightening off your body, off your systems, and you'll feel good. And then you'll have other times where you just feel so down because you're still processing that illusion that's falling away. It is a particularly intense time. And when we start to really see things for as they are, that may seem like, yay, that's so great, that's amazing. But it's really, really hard, especially when it's not something you're expecting. I consider it to be an awakening process as well, and just the illusions dropping. So any tense moments that you might feel, any of those hard moments, to me, they're normal and natural as long as you're working through what's coming up for you. And something I really want to add for you to remember, this dark night of the soul, to me, I consider it to also be a remembering process of who you truly are, connecting with your true self and your purpose and your path. Many get caught up in this pattern of thinking, oh, these experiences and emotions and this dark night of the soul is low vibe and it's not good. But that's also a judgment. And as I talked about emotions before, many judge anger as being low vibe or sadness as being low vibe. But when you even consider sadness, when it is being utilized healthfully, it brings balance to joy, and it also brings harmony to life. So when you think of sadness, that's a powerful tool in our emotional tool belt. Sadness and joy together helps bring harmony and, expansion into our lives as well. And as we do the work, our triggers will be less, for sure. They won't be nearly as often or as much, and we also won't push them down and suppress them. But also remember that being human, we are going to catch certain patterns when they occur. And when we catch them, we'll be able to understand it somewhat in the moment and make a conscious choice to respond differently. And then because we're human, there'll be other times where we don't catch it. Well, we might somewhat catch it, but we still respond in a way where we think is not the best. And that's normal too, but that won't be nearly as often. And I know for me, I used to be this trigger minefield when I was younger. You step on one little thing the wrong way and I explode. So that's kind of how I was. And now I'm happy to say that those things, they rarely ever happen now. But just know we can't expect to ever feel anything. Sorry, I said that the wrong way. We can't expect to not feel any other emotions other than joy. Some people say, well, we just get to a place where all we feel is joy and that's the end goal. That is not realistic. We are here to encompass the full spectrum of emotions, in my opinion. And this is also a part of that dark night of the soul. It also helps you create this emotional intelligence, this discernment, this awareness. So it can be very, very healing if you allow it to be and see it for what it is, and allow the grieving process to happen when you start to shift your world and your reality and into something more true for you. And then this whole remembering process, our vibration will just get stronger and stronger the more we do the work. And the more that we actually put boundaries out there, it'll help our auric fields, it'll help our Wei Qi, and it'll even help our cell membranes on a micro level. When we have boundaries, all of our protective mechanisms in the system become way healthier as well, and know what to do because energetically we know what our boundaries are. And sometimes you might have situations where, I don't like to use the word test because that's not it, but we'll have experiences that will come in and it'll be like, okay, so are you really strong on this boundary, right? And it just gives us that opportunity to really feel what's like to put that boundary into play. And in this, we can become more aware of our energy, more aware of our energy leaks, our energy drains, and be more effective and more honoring of our true self. So simply put, when we start becoming aware of these illusions and masks and experiences, we're also aware of our ego state. Our ego mind is that part of us that tries to keep us safe, but can often be unrealistic and programmed by our experiences. And when we're in full ego, we actually deny our higher self, our true self. I like calling the higher self the true self, by the way. And a few things that have helped me through this as well is that going into awareness, the one thing I've been catching the most, and I know this will help you through the dark night of the soul as well, is to really understand that other people's behavior is really just their own projections, okay? So what you experience from another person isn't personal. And that is something that's really hard. And it was so hard for me to have that sink in, feeling, oh, other people's behavior isn't personal to me, even though it feels very personal when they're attacking you and calling you out on things. But I've learned to sit in this space of compassion and really read and hear between what they're really saying. You can literally hear their pain and their projection as they're doing this. They may say, oh, you're bad and you've done this, blah, blah, blah. And when I come from this, I don't mean put up with that behavior either, okay? I'm just saying be aware that it's really a projection, because in my experience, and this might help you, is that when this has happened to me, I thought, what did I do wrong? How can I be a better person? I'm such a horrible person. And really, that's just your ego state saying that this is a personal attack when it's not, regardless of where they're coming from. And again, when certain patterns and behaviors and things like that show up, I suggest to journal that out, because having that awareness, for me, it's helpful to see it on paper. So there's times where when I get really stressed out, I drink more coffee. And I don't know why, because coffee doesn't make me feel hyper, it doesn't make me feel alert, it actually crashes my system. So it's interesting to make those connections and to know, okay, I'm really craving extra coffee. This must mean I'm stressed. Okay, what can I do about my stress that doesn't involve drinking 2 pots of coffee right now? How can I calm my nervous system? So finding ways to relieve your stress is also very beneficial. So another thing as well to come from is to not come from a place of things are good or evil, people are good or evil, experiences are good or evil. It's really coming from this awareness state that people are just unaware. They're acting from programs, conditioning, belief systems, and emotions that they are largely unaware of. And this is why boundary work is so important, because you can understand that and have compassion and have love, but also put up a boundary saying, how you're treating me is not okay right now. When you act this way, I feel this way. What can we do? So there's a lot of this within the dark night of the soul to be aware of, to know that a lot of people are largely unconscious of what they're doing, and that you're also worthy of love. just by being yourself. This is another huge one in Dark Night of the Soul as well, is that you must be a role, you must wear a mask in order to receive love. And this is personality modification, okay? Usually to avoid conflict or to avoid, rejection, we put on a mask, we put on a role, we try to prove our worth and our value by giving. So make that an affirmation and reminder for you that you're worthy of love just by being yourself. And by being yourself is just being your true self, right? So being aware of all these patterns and behaviors and emotions and things like that, and not needing to necessarily fulfill a role to be then worthy of love or attention or whatever the case may be for you. And the last piece as well that I will say is make sure that you surround yourself with people who are actually supportive and people who actually listen without judgment, okay? So here's where I come into the compassion piece, because we may have many people around us who will listen to us, but they're not largely supportive. And this will show up in ways where they try to interject into your experience, try to tell you how to fix it, try to tell you that, oh, well, you created this, or try to tell you what you need to do in order to work through it. Unless you've asked for that sort of advice, or unless you've given that sort of permission, then this is another place to have boundaries as well. And make sure that you come from this place of, I just need you to listen in this experience that I'm having. Are you available? And if they're not available for 5 or 10 minutes, don't make it a story about you. This was like a huge thing that came through yesterday for me, was actually giving people the choice. Are you available to listen to me? And if not, then find someone else who can. And don't make it a story as to where they weren't available so they don't love you, or things to that nature. Having people in your corner that can be compassionate, empathetic, and listen to you for 5 or 10 minutes about what you're dealing with without interjecting and stepping in is very healing, because sometimes that's all we need, is just to feel heard. And then you can ask, I would like some advice. What do you think? So that's a huge, powerful tool in itself, because a lot of us are programmed to be a rescuer. A lot of us are programmed to be a victim in some way, or a perpetrator. So there's a lot of that victim triangle that can show up, especially in Dark Night of the Soul. So just be aware of that archetype. So the last piece, I just want to bring in a little bit more about that compassion, empathy, because this goes into this whole thing we were talking about, that people aren't good or evil. They're just unaware of what they're dealing with at times, and they project that outwards. So I had experience the other day where I had written this big long post, and it was something that I really believed in, because I've met so many practitioners who think they need to be in a state of perfection in order to be a practitioner. And my whole thing was, as long as you're actively working on your stuff, you don't need to be perfect and fully healed in order to start, a specific journey. And someone had a message on there about that. And at first it triggered me. It really did. She disagreed, and I was like, I felt that whole tension in my gut. My gut dropped, and I almost went into that story of, what did I do wrong? And I laugh now, but at the time I was like, nope, I'm going to catch this. So I caught it. I'm like, why am I triggered? And then I asked myself, and I said, have you fully read what she said? Are you fully understanding where she's coming from? So I held love and compassion in my heart as I read. And it's like, you can almost read between the lines at this point when you're sitting from this space. You can feel the hurt and the pain that the person is coming through. And I had love and I had compassion. And, I said, I can relate. Here's been my experience, right? And I totally get where you're coming from. But this was also my intention by my story. So I clearly expressed what my intention was. And I said, I appreciate you bringing this to light because it makes sense. And I can absolutely relate to that as well. And even if it was something I couldn't relate to, I would just say, I can't relate, but I think your viewpoint and you bringing this up, right? So just seeing the person and having that compassion. And it's funny because we've had so many conversations since then, so many good, deep, compassionate conversations And for me, having a feminine wound around feeling like there's always been competition, comparison, or being attacked by women, being bullied by women, not feeling safe around women. So being able to catch that, hold that, and have both of us had a really healing conversation with each other. And I've played with this throughout the years as well. Like when someone is really triggered, holding that love and compassion. And sometimes, you don't have those loving, deep conversations past that one point. But you know what? Maybe later on down the road, it can help them shift whatever they were dealing with at that moment in time. But then also think of it from the other side. If you're in a trigger state and someone held love and compassion for you, how would you respond, right? You probably would de-escalate pretty quickly that someone says, I understand, I hear you. Here's my intention though, and I'm sorry that you feel that way. Can you imagine how powerful that would be if we all did this? When people are sitting in their trauma and we just held love and compassion. But the thing is, even if you do that, some may not want it. They might get more angry, and that's okay. And that's when you can take a step back and release them with love and say, like, I'm sorry that you're feeling this way, but also the way that you're communicating with me is not okay. So I'm just going to take a step back and remove myself from the situation. That way you don't enable that behavior, but you're also still holding love and compassion without judging, blaming, and attacking in return, right? So yes, I know I'm kind of living in this perfect world here, but even if we just started to practice this and play with this, I think it would be such a healing thing for the earth and for everyone involved, because we've all been through something traumatic. Regardless of how loving our childhood and teen years may be, we've all gone through something that's been really, really difficult for us. And yeah, just coming from that compassionate, loving place and understanding why your trigger is also there with that other person being triggered, right? So understanding, catching it, observing it, and releasing it, and choosing a different way. So let me know if you get value from this podcast. Leave me a message. And happy working through your dark night of the soul. And make sure you have support. Make sure you take these action steps. And it will make it a little bit easier. It's not going to take the painful process away, but it'll give you a bit of an awareness of what's happening and what's going on for you and how to move forward without making it into, I guess, something bigger and worse than it really is. I mean, it's really intense and hard in itself, but if we can get some understanding of what's happening and why, I find that's really helpful, especially for me. And that way we can start taking these action steps and start working through that pain in the process and start getting some support. I mean, this work isn't for the faint of heart. The self-growth and development, I'm not going to lie to you, it's not butterflies and rainbows all day. It is hard, deep work. And my other suggestion is to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with a supportive network, but also people who are doing the same, because they will understand and get it as well. I'm not saying other people can understand you, but it's really good to surround yourself with those who are doing similar things and are actively growing and evolving as well. So thank you so much for listening and tuning into this first episode. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I'll catch you on the next one.